Good morning. I'm Congressman Joe Crowley. I'm the chair of the Democratic Caucus in the House of Representatives. I'm joined by the Vice Chair, Linda Sanchez of California, and we will be joined momentarily by the ranking member on the House Ways and Means Committee, Congressman Richie Neal from Massachusetts. First and foremost, let me say that speaking on behalf of myself, and I'm sure Linda would also like to share thoughts about the shooting in Texas this week. Our thoughts and prayers once again go to the victims and their families. The idea that an infant child was killed, a pregnant woman was killed, little children were killed, dozens of people killed once again in a tragic event in Texas. Many of us here feel very helpless because of the inability to act, to help to protect human life throughout the country when it comes to gun violence. Just a couple of weeks ago, dealing with the issue of Nevada, Las Vegas shooting. It seems almost weekly now we have a moment of silence for victims of gun violence, massive massacres in parts of the country. When it'll end, we don't know if it will ever end. But what I do know that seems endless is the Congress's inability to act to bring about some type of effort to curtail what is really a public health crisis. We are also deliberating right now the Republican tax scam. I'd like to call it a plan, I'd like to call it something else, but it's simply a scam. It's taking from the poor to give to the rich. It is borrowing against the future of America. Between $1.5 trillion and $2.6 trillion. What I can say to you is that 45% of middle-class Americans between now and 2026 will see a tax hike. Many families, many middle-class families in New York will see a tax bill of more than $1,200 a year on average. And when something like owning a home was supposed to be part of the American dream, this tax scam makes that dream a nightmare for many homeowners. It was interesting yesterday to watch some of our colleagues defend their position when it comes to the issue of state and local tax deduction. It really made me squirm a little bit in my seat. I wonder how they felt. The reality is we know that the elimination of SALT, the state and local tax deduction, will hurt many, many, many people in my district, in Massachusetts, in California, and just about every state in this country will see many of their constituents hurt by the elimination of the ability to deduct state and local taxes. We know that pertains as well to the inability under the Republican tax scam to deduct interest on student loans, to deduct interest on medical expensing, and the list goes on and on and on. We stand ready to work in a bipartisan way to bring about common sense changes to the tax code. We haven't been invited yet to do so, but I know the ranking member is willing to do that as well. I hope that at some point our Republican colleagues come to their senses and understand this bill, this tax scam bill, is not good for America. And we wait for their coming to that reality and including us. Let me turn now to the Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus, Linda Sanchez.
Thank you. Mr. Neal, would you like to go? Yeah. I'm going to allow our ranking member, Mr. Neal, to speak before me. He has to open the session of the second day of the markup of the tax bill. So, Mr. Neal.
Thanks. One of the things that the majority did here was they advertised this tax reform package as simplicity. When you have a chance to sift through it, it adds to complexity. Coupled with the fact they take away, I think, many of the stimulant effects of what sound tax policy can do, including new markets tax credits and historic tax credits, and they also, I think, limit the ability of local officials by taking away the state and local tax deduction, of which 32% of my constituents directly benefit. I can't tell you how many places across America the New Markets Tax Credits has worked very effectively. And at the same time, I also think that across the South, the number of historic settings that would benefit if they kept the historic tax credit is also a reminder of the fact that I've repeatedly pointed out that they keep trying to squeeze a size 12 foot into a size 7 shoe. And I think that levels of complexity, more concentrated wealth, and clearly they've missed the argument when they keep saying that the middle class is going to enjoy broad-based tax relief. There's simply no evidence of it when you go through the documents that they've produced. And recall that in 2001 and in 2003, and with repatriated tax money in 2005, in each instance, they said it was going to lead to significant job growth. That's the same argument they're using in here. There is no evidence to support that conclusion. There could be a sugar high for a year or so, but this idea that they again advertise that they're going to witness economic growth north of 3 or 4%, it doesn't stand up under any sort of magnifying glass evidence. And I do have to get back in there if it's okay.
So, Linda, do you want to expound a little more?
Sure. If I could just say that the Republican tax plan is a fiasco for middle-class families. As much as they want to sell it as middle-class tax relief, the fact of the matter is that most of the provisions that they're proposing either are eliminated or lose their value over time for middle-class families. But the bill continues to be more and more generous for the wealthiest Americans, those in the top 1%, the millionaires and billionaires. And I'm just going to give one small example. So they've made this great argument that they give a $300 deduction to a filer and to their spouse. Well, that phases out after 5 years, they eliminate that. And that's one of the so-called middle-class tax benefits. But about the time when they eliminate that for middle-class families, that's when they allow millionaires and billionaires to pass their estates without any tax whatsoever. So a billionaire can pass billions of dollars on tax-free at the same time they are yanking the rug out from middle-class families. Now, the fact of the matter is this bill is not balanced. There's no proportionality. They talk about how every quartile sees a tax cut, but if you look at in proportion to income, the people who make out under this bill are the people who need the help the least. And the real people who are going to suffer under this tax fiasco are middle class and working class families that are struggling to get by. Now, they can sell it any way that they want, but facts are facts. And the fact is that while they increase the standard deduction, they take away many of the provisions that middle class families rely on. Things like being able to deduct student loan debt, things like adoption deduction if they adopt children, things like teachers being able to deduct the cost of materials that they buy for their classrooms so that their kids can learn. Families with high medical costs. If you're a family and you have a particular family member with cancer who has to be in and out of treatments, they remove those deductions. So on balance, all of those families are worse off. And the people who really gain under this are large corporations. They're willing to put this country in trillions of dollars of debt. They're willing to give trillions of dollars of tax relief to millionaires, billionaires, and corporations. And then when they've racked up all this debt, they're going to come back and say, oh my gosh, we've got so much debt. We have to cut Social Security and Medicare, all investments in infrastructure, investments in education, all of the things that middle class families rely on to have a fair shot to get ahead. So we are in the process of trying to make this awful bill better. It's been a completely partisan process. They've not reached out to us at all. We expect that most all of our amendments, if not 100% of them, will be rejected because they're not interested in crafting good policy. They're interested in scoring a win for their big dollar donors so they can do a victory lap and announce that they've actually managed to accomplish one thing this entire year. So we want the American people to know you're being lied to blatantly. This is not something that is going to help middle class families. don't buy into it. They are going to give middle-class families a shiny new dime. They're going to say, here, this is your tax relief, while they allow corporations and millionaires to shove hundreds of dollars in their pocket and walk out the door laughing. We're not standing for that. We're fighting every step of the way, but we want the American people to know who's really fighting for them.
So once again, we have a bill that caters to the needs of special interest corporations as well as the rich and wealthy and most powerful in this nation at the expense of the middle class. It opens up the debt once again between $1.5 and $2.6 trillion and even more over the next 20 years. And it does nothing to promote job growth here in the United States and continues to incentivize growth overseas. We believe that that's a formula for disaster for America and not for progress. And with that, we'll open up to questions.
Effectively allowing the state and local tax division is basically having low tax states subsidize the high tax states.
Well, in many respects, a state like New York and California, we're donor states. We don't get back every dollar that we give to the federal government. Many of the states that are described as receiver states get back more than they give to the federal government. We were all given a good lesson yesterday by Congressman Brian Higgins from New York as to how the issue of state and local tax deductibility came into place in the first place after the Civil War, and the need to pay off those debts that the nation had incurred. The creation of a federal income tax law and this provision was provided so that would not be, as Brian described it, as a money grab by the federal government. And all our colleagues who talk about states' rights, this really is the epitome of states' rights, the autonomy of states to conduct their business and not be imposed upon by the federal government. And that's exactly what's happening here. We've had members of the New York delegation on the Republican side who are defending their vote to take away state and local tax deductibility. I guess the 7 Republicans who voted to preserve it were wrong. And the 2 Republicans in New York State, Mr. Collins and Mr. Reed, they must be right. Everyone else in New York State is wrong, but these 2 gentlemen, they get it right, but no one else does. I think it's astonishing that every Republican member from California voted to eliminate state and local tax deductions. I don't know what their constituents are thinking. I don't know what they're thinking, but I certainly know what their constituents are thinking. But if their middle class constituency is thinking, they're going to know that they're being scammed right now. Linda?
Yeah, I would just add that for a state like California, eliminating a state and local tax deduction is basically a kick in the teeth to all families. Cost of housing is high, and people rely on that. The average person claims about $18,000 in state and local tax deductions. And if they eliminate that, many, many families are going to see a huge tax bill at the end of the year. This includes middle-class families and even low-income families. It affects everyone. And I can't believe that my colleagues, particularly in the southern half of the state where cost of living is high, Mimi Walters, Ed Royce, Dana Rohrabacher, that they're perfectly fine with throwing that additional tax burden on their constituents and yet turning around and telling them that they're cutting taxes for the middle class. It's a lie. And I think people just want their government to be honest with them, and what the Republicans are doing is dishonest. It's disingenuous, and it's meant to mislead. This isn't providing middle-class families with tax relief. We could do that in a bill, but Republicans are too hell-bent on trying again to eliminate things like the estate tax for millionaires and billionaires, to allow high-income earners to claim more of the child tax credit so that low-income families don't see the relief that they need. And it's bad policy, but they're insistent on going it alone, and we'll see what the American people have to say about it, because I expect they'll be hearing from their constituents once they know what is in that bill.
I suspect that Kevin McCarthy, the majority leader of the House, told his members from California, do me a favor, vote for this, let's just get this through and we'll fix it later on. Well, I got news for his members, they ain't fixing it. In all likelihood, it's going to get worse. And really who suffers and who pays are the average taxpayers in California and around the country as well because of their negligence. questions? Yes.
Kind of going off of that question, do you think Republicans have been targeting Democratic states like New York or California with their policy proposals this year, specifically with tax reform and health care? Both of those bills have big impacts on some Democratic states.
Well, I think the media has reported on that. And, I think my observation would be yes. I think that is, unfortunately, further an attempt to divide America when we should be trying to bring it together. The president's dividing America, the Republican Congress, and the Ryan McConnell tax scam bill is going to further divide America, I believe, if it ever is enacted. I think this is a ways to go, but I'm calling upon people of goodwill on both sides of the aisle, and people throughout the country to express some outrage in terms of what the attempt here is to do. They're going, Linda talked about the estate tax. That benefits 0.002% of America. 0.002% of benefit from the elimination of the estate tax. Doesn't affect anyone in my district at all. And what it does, it puts a burden, it places a further burden on the future of America. They do that by blowing out the deficit again, anywhere between 1.5 to 2.6 trillion dollars. That means our children and grandchildren will be paying for that cost. But yes, I do think that many of the states that are hit hardest are states like California, Illinois, New York, Pennsylvania, Michigan. So the list goes on and on and on. Just about every state, though, has some form of state and local tax deduction in place right now under federal law. So it really is an assault on every state. But there are certain states that pay a heavier penalty than others. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.